Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision. It is almost like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the film, and the doctor just points and says, like, there it is.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
Right. Yeah, it is completely binary. I mean, it is either broken or it is not broken. It is a very clean line of logic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there is something deeply comforting about that.
Yeah.
We humans like things to be visible. We like to categorize our problems neatly. But then you take a step outside of that clinic and you step into the world of global geopolitics, you step into internal state policy or like macroeconomics, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely shattered.
Oh, absolutely shattered.
Right. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, quite honestly, murky. The lines are blurred, the symptoms are totally contradictory, and the cure for one issue often causes a massive side effect somewhere else entirely.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Every single policy move has this butterfly effect that just, ripples across continents and economies.
It really does. And that is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive, or the 3D Initiative of UPSC with Sarba Kaushik. If you are listening to this right now, whether you're commuting, prepping for a major exam, or just trying to make sense of the world, your mission and our mission is exactly the same.
Spot on.
We are here to cut through the relentless noise of the daily news cycle and isolate the actual signal. Today, we are tracing the invisible lines of power and policy, and we have a massive syllabus to get through today, but we're not just going to read you a list. We're going to start deep underground with India's hunt for critical minerals. We will follow the money through new foreign funding laws and big tech monopolies reshaping the apps right on your phone, and we will end up in the incredibly volatile, murky waters of the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, and to make sure we navigate these muddy waters effectively, we have structured this deep dive to really build momentum. So we will start by laying down a fast-paced foundation, extracting the critical highlights from the Press Information Bureau.
Right, the PIB highlights.
Exactly. We are talking about the Critical Minerals Mission, the high-stakes BRICS National Security Advisors meeting, the strategic public health play behind International Yoga Day, the shifting values of the Padma Awards, a massive green transformation at the VOC port, the grim realities of our Kharif crop preparedness amid all this climate whiplash, and finally, the recognition of our youth through the Bal Puraskar.
And let me tell you, that is just the warm-up to get our bearings.
Precisely. Because once that foundation is set, we are taking a massive plunge into the deep end. We have 7 extensive analytical breakdowns covering general studies papers 2 and 3.
The heavy hitters.
Oh, yeah. We are going to unpack the legal anatomy of the new FCRA amendments, the maritime emergency trapping thousands in the Strait of Hormuz, the constitutional arguments surrounding the telegram ban, the severe economic vulnerabilities exposed by the West Asia crisis, the really fascinating legal debate over the RSS's legal personality, Meta's nearly billion-dollar move with CRED, and finally, Pakistan's unexpected diplomatic role as a peacemaker.
Wow.
And of course, we will round out the hour by rapid-firing the highest-yield prelims and mapping facts you absolutely need to lock in.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I promise you, by the time we finish this deep dive, the connecting threads between a local port in Tamil Nadu, a digital ban on your phone, and a geopolitical standoff in the Middle East are going to be crystal clear. So let's establish that foundation.
Let's do it.
We begin with something quite literal, digging into the earth. The government just announced the results of the Critical Minerals Mission auctions, which sits right at the intersection of GS3 economy and mining. So they auctioned off 56 critical and strategic mineral blocks out of the 88 that were offered.
Right, which is a 63% success rate.
Yeah, and that is substantial for this kind of extraction sector. Plus, they have added 10 new blocks in the 7th tranche and 11 new exploration licenses.
What's really fascinating here is the sheer geographic spread of this operation. Historically, mining in India has been heavily concentrated in a few specific resource-rich central and eastern states.
Sure, the usual suspects.
Exactly. But for the very first time, we are seeing central government auctions for critical mineral blocks happening in Gujarat, Uttarakhand, and Telangana. Furthermore, those exploration licenses, the ELs, which are essentially the precursor rights to go in and figure out exactly what is under the ground, they have been expanded to Arunachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, and Odisha.
Just to help you visualize this, think of it as a modern-day gold rush. But instead of prospectors digging for shiny rocks to lock away in a bank vault, we are digging for the actual physical building blocks of the 21st century. I mean, we are talking about graphite, rare earth elements, vanadium, titanium.
Yeah, these are not just valuable commodities. They are the absolute prerequisites for electric vehicle batteries, semiconductor manufacturing, and advanced national defense systems.
Right. And to truly understand why the government is pushing this so aggressively, we have to look at the structural mechanics of these minerals. Take rare earth elements, or REs.
Well, the name is a bit of a misnomer, honestly.
Oh, how so?
They aren't necessarily rare in the Earth's crust, but they are incredibly difficult and toxic to extract and refine into usable metals. But you cannot have a modern electronics industry without them. They control the electrical and magnetic properties of components at the atomic level. Yeah, your smartphone screen, the permanent magnets in an EV motor, the guidance system of a precision missile, they all rely on REEs. Vanadium and titanium are essential for creating high-strength, lightweight aerospace alloys. If you want to build indigenous fighter jets or expand space exploration, you need those metals.
And graphite.
Graphite is the unsung hero. It is non-negotiable for the anode material in the lithium-ion batteries driving the entire global clean energy transition.
But here is the staggering statistic that makes this entire mission not just an economic project, but an urgent matter of national security. Right now, as we speak, India imports anywhere from 85 to 100% of its critical mineral needs.
Yeah, it's wild.
Just let that sink in. For the entire future of our tech sector, our green energy transition, and our defense manufacturing, we are almost entirely dependent on external supply chains.
Which is a terrifying vulnerability for any sovereign nation. We've seen how easily global supply chains can snap. I mean, if a geopolitical rival who happens to control the refinement of these minerals, like China, for instance, which completely dominates global REE processing, decides to restrict exports, India's EV transition and advanced electronics manufacturing could literally grind to an absolute halt overnight.
Just overnight?
Yeah. They wouldn't even need to fire a shot. They just close the export tap. That is exactly why the legal basis here, driven by the MMDR Act amendments and the National Critical Mineral Mission of 2024, is so hyper-focused on import substitution. This is the bedrock of Maritime, or self-reliance. It is not just about mining rocks. It is about securing sovereign capability so we cannot be held hostage by foreign supply chains.
And securing what is beneath our soil is directly linked to how we secure the borders above it. It's all about minimizing vulnerabilities. Which brings us right into our next development. The BRICS National Security Advisors meeting that just took place in New Delhi. This falls perfectly under GS2, International Relations and Security. Prime Minister Modi met with the NSAs of all the BRICS nations, and India's own NSA, Ajit Doval, presided over the core sessions.
Right, and the context here is vital. India holds the BRICS chair for 2026. This gathering is the cornerstone of the political and security pillar of BRICS cooperation. And when you look at the guest list, the concentration of global leverage in that one room in New Delhi was immense.
Heavy hitters all around. You had China's Wang Yi, who wasn't just an NSA. He's the de facto foreign policy chief, the foreign minister, and a high-ranking Politburo member.
Oh, exactly.
You had Russia's Nikolai Patrushev, Iran's Ali Ahmadian, along with the top security officials from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt, Indonesia, South Africa, and Brazil.
And because it is a room filled with people who manage the hard power of their respective nations, the agenda outcomes were highly pragmatic. They issued a very specific joint counterterrorism statement. Instead of just broad condemnations, they specifically targeted and named the financial channels and banking loopholes used by cross-border terrorist groups.
Getting specific, finally.
Yeah. They also had to hash out an energy security framework, which is critical in the wake of the recent Muscat Accord that we will dive into later. But crucially, they spent significant time on AI governance standards, which is where India presented its MNE framework.
Wait, let's pause on MNV for a second. We hear about AI constantly, but what is India actually trying to do here geopolitically? Is it just like a suggestion box, or is there a strategic goal?
Oh, it is a highly strategic move. AI is developing at a breakneck pace, and right now, the global rules of the road are being written primarily by Western tech companies and governments. India's MANA-AV framework is an attempt to establish a unified, human-centric rulebook for the Global South before the technology becomes fully weaponized or fundamentally disruptive to developing economies.
So trying to get ahead of the curve.
Exactly. It focuses on preventing autonomous lethal weapons, ensuring strict data privacy protocols that don't just favor massive corporations, and demanding algorithmic transparency. By presenting this at BRICS, India is trying to build a consensus bloc that can counterbalance Western AI dominance.
I see. So it's about shaping the rules before they are imposed on us. But honestly, it's Fascinating as the multilateral AI talks are, what I find even more intriguing is what happens in the hallways outside the main conference room, the bilateral meetings on the sidelines.
Oh, always.
Right. Ajit Doval and Wang Yi had a private sit-down.
Yes, and that private sit-down is arguably more impactful for India's immediate security than the broader BRICS agenda. It raises an important question about the current temperature of India-China relations. Their discussion reportedly centered directly on the progress or lack thereof regarding troop disengagement along the line of actual control, the LAC.
There are even reports suggesting they discussed pinning down a potential date for the 25th Special Representative boundary talks. That is massive. You have this highly publicized multilateral summit happening with cameras everywhere, but the quiet, gritty, one-on-one border diplomacy between two nuclear-armed neighbors is grinding forward in the background.
It is a perfect example of how hard power and immediate border security truly dominate the NSA level. It is the reality of geopolitical maneuvering. Multilateral forums provide the convenient umbrella under which these vital bilateral friction points can be addressed without the glare of a standalone summit.
But here is the fascinating duality of Indian statecraft. While India is aggressively flexing its hard power muscles and negotiating border standoffs in closed-door NSA meetings, on that very same weekend, it was simultaneously projecting its global soft power out in the open air.
Right, the yoga events.
Exactly. This perfectly transitions us to our third piece of the foundation, the International Day of Yoga 2026. This straddles GS1 and GS2, blending culture with diplomacy. Prime Minister Modi led the 12th IDY mass demonstration at Rajghat, and the designated theme this year was Yoga for Healthy Aging.
And before we dismiss this as just a cultural photo op, we really need to look at the sheer scale of the logistical and diplomatic execution. I mean, we're looking at coordinated mass demonstrations in over 195 countries. Over 30 million people participated globally. Indian diplomatic missions in over 175 countries simultaneously hosted events.
I always marvel at the diplomatic engineering that went into making this happen. If you roll the tape back to 2014, India proposed this initiative at the United Nations, and they managed to get 177 countries to co-sponsor the UN General Assembly resolution.
Huge.
To this day, it remains the largest co-sponsorship ever achieved for a UNGA resolution. It is, without a doubt, India's ultimate soft power export. It creates a massive reservoir of global goodwill.
It absolutely does. But if we connect this to the specific theme chosen for 2026 Yoga for Healthy Aging, we see a fascinating pivot. This isn't just about projecting ancient cultural heritage abroad anymore. It is actually a highly preemptive public health strategy tied directly to a very critical looming domestic demographic shift within India itself.
Okay, unpack that for me. How does a global yoga day function as a domestic public health strategy?
It comes down to the numbers. We constantly hear about India's demographic dividend, our massive, energetic youth population. But the reality of demographics is that youth inevitably ages. India is rapidly graying. By 2036, statistical projections show that roughly 15% of India's total population will be over the age of 60.
Wow.
Yeah, we are talking about hundreds of millions of elderly citizens.
Which places an unimaginable burden on the national healthcare infrastructure.
Exactly. The hospital systems, the insurance networks, the geriatric care facilities, they will be completely overwhelmed by chronic age-related conditions. So what is the government's response? The medical benefits of routine yoga, improving joint flexibility, maintaining core balance to prevent catastrophic falls, naturally reducing blood pressure, and preserving cognitive function through meditation. These are direct, clinically proven interventions for the exact health challenges an aging population faces. By elevating this theme globally, the Ayush Ministry isn't just organizing a nice event. They're trying to embed a low-cost, decentralized, preventative public health tool into the daily habits of billions of Indians before that 2036 demographic wave crashes.
That is brilliant. It's taking a traditional cultural asset and deploying it as a structural solution to a future macroeconomic healthcare crisis.
It shows how interlinked culture and domestic policy really are. And speaking of how the state views and values its culture and its people, let's look at how the state officially recognizes extraordinary citizens.
The Padma Awards.
Yes, our fourth topic, the Padma Awards 2026. This is classic GS1 art and culture. President Draupadi Murmu recently presented the awards at the civil investiture ceremony, the second, at Rashtriya Bhavan. Just to quickly establish the framework for anyone taking notes, the Bharat Ratna is the absolute highest civilian award in the country. That is followed by the Padma Vibhushan for exceptional and distinguished service, the Padma Bhushan for distinguished service of a high order, and finally the Padma Shri for distinguished service in any field.
Now, the pipeline for these nominations is incredibly rigorous, right? I mean, you don't just get one because you have a good PR team.
Not at all. It is a deeply vetted, multi-layered process. It begins with the Ministry of Home Affairs, the MHA, explicitly inviting nominations from the general public, state governments, and various institutions. Literally anyone can nominate a citizen.
Okay.
The MHA's dedicated awards committee then sifts through thousands of applications to create a shortlist. And that shortlist doesn't just get approved. It has to travel all the way up the chain of command to the Prime Minister's office and ultimately to the President of India for final seal of approval vetting.
And what I find really striking, and what the sources specifically highlight about the 2026 recipients, is the deliberate trend in who is making it through that rigorous pipeline. There's a massive, unmistakable focus on tribal arts, indigenous knowledge preservation, and grassroots innovators. We are seeing the President of India honoring individuals who have literally spent 4 decades doing quiet, unglamorous, transformative work in remote villages, completely invisible to the mainstream media.
What is fascinating here is the sociology of the awards. An award given by the head of state is a profound signal of what the state values. For a long time, there was a perception that these awards heavily favored elite, urban achievers in mainstream fields, famous actors, prominent industrialists, well-connected doctors.
Right, the usual celebrities.
Exactly. By shifting the spotlight to a tribal artisan preserving a dying language, or a farmer who developed a drought-resistant seed variety, the government is actively redefining the archetype of the Indian hero. They're elevating indigenous knowledge systems and local sustainability efforts to the same prestige level as a lifetime of corporate achievement.
It really democratizes the concept of national contribution. And speaking of local sustainability efforts that have national implications, let's look at a massive environmental engineering feat happening right now on India's southern coast. This brings us to topic 5. The Green Maritime model at the VOC port, this is GS3, environment intersecting heavily with the economy. The Viochita Barnard port down in Thoothukudi, Tamil Nadu, has just verified a staggering 45% reduction in their total carbon emissions.
And because of that aggressive reduction, they have officially become India's very first major port to achieve the ISO 14001 certification. For context, ISO 14001 is the gold standard, globally recognized international framework for environmental management systems.
Now, to achieve a 45% drop in emissions at a massive industrial port, you can't just plant a few trees along the perimeter fence and call it a day. The specific technology and engineering they had to implement is heavy duty. According to the sources, they installed multiple 5-megawatt wind turbines right on the port premises. They carpeted all the warehouse rooftops with solar panels. They retrofitted the entire facility with low-draw LED lighting and set up EV charging networks for their internal transport fleets.
All great steps.
But the absolute game changer, the piece of tech that really moved the needle, is the shore power supply system.
Yes, the shore power infrastructure is the critical mechanism here. To understand why, you have to picture what happens when a massive ocean-going cargo ship docks at a berth. Even though the ship isn't moving, it cannot just turn off. It requires a tremendous amount of electricity to keep the refrigeration units running, to power the cargo cranes, the living quarters, and the massive internal computer systems.
So it's still burning fuel while parked.
Exactly. Traditionally, to generate that power, the ship has to keep its massive diesel-powered auxiliary engines running nonstop the entire time it is in port. It is essentially burning tons of raw diesel right there at the dock, pumping dense particulate matter and greenhouse gases directly into the local coastal air.
It's like sitting at a really long multi-day red light and keeping your massive SUV engine idling the entire time.
That's a great comparison. Shore power changes that entirely. It allows the ship to physically plug a massive cable into the port's electrical grid. And because the VOC port's grid is now heavily powered by those wind turbines and solar panels, the ship can completely shut down its diesel engines. It draws clean power from the shore. The emissions drop to 0 while at berth.
But implementing that can't be easy. The voltage synchronization, the sheer power draw of a cargo ship, I mean, you'd fry a normal grid.
Oh, it requires immense capital expenditure. You have to upgrade the local substations, lay massive high-voltage cables right to the water's edge, and install frequency converters so the port's power matches the ship's specific requirements.
So if we look at the government's broader Sagarmala Green Port program, which has set a target of achieving net zero carbon for all 12 of India's major ports by the year 2047. Can this VOC model just be copy-pasted across the rest of the country?
In theory, the engineering is proven. The challenge, as always, is the financing. Retrofitting older legacy ports in congested cities like Mumbai or Kolkata with shore power infrastructure and dedicated renewable microgrids is vastly more expensive than building it fresh. But the VOC port, named after the legendary helmsman of Tamil, V.O. Chidambaranar, has provided the crucial proof of concept. They have proven that the return on investment, both in terms of operational efficiency and environmental mitigation, is viable. It is the literal blueprint for that 2047 net zero goal.
It is incredible progress on the mitigation front. But here is the brutal irony of climate change. While we are spending billions to mitigate future carbon emissions at our ports, the immediate chaotic effects of the climate anomalies we've already caused are hitting our agricultural sector right now.
Yeah, it's a harsh reality.
And it is devastating. Let's look at topic 6. Kharif crop preparedness amid El Niño concerns. This is GS3, Agriculture and Climate. The Union Agriculture Minister, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, just held a high-level emergency review meeting, and the data they are looking at is honestly grim.
It paints a very harsh reality. As of late June, the meteorological data shows a national rainfall deficit of 35% below the long-period average. That is the baseline we use to measure a normal monsoon.
Right.
But the regional breakdowns are even worse. Central India is sitting at a 65% deficit. Northwest India is at a staggering 77% deficit. Only the northeast region is showing a surplus, and often that surplus manifests as destructive flooding rather than useful agricultural rain.
The phrase that really jumped out at me from the source documents was break monsoon since June 10th. Now, we hear these meteorological terms all the time, but what does a break monsoon actually mean on the ground in the dirt for a farmer right now?
It means acute, immediate panic, particularly regarding the paddy transplanting window. The agricultural calendar for Kharif crops is incredibly tight. Paddy, or rice, requires a very specific process. The seeds are grown in small nurseries, and then, usually between mid-June and mid-July, those delicate saplings must be physically transplanted into the main fields.
Okay.
But here is the catch. Paddy must be transplanted into standing water. The fields have to be flooded. With a break in the monsoon, meaning the rains simply stop for weeks, those main fields are bone dry.
So if a farmer goes ahead and transplants the saplings into dry soil, they die.
They wither and die. But if the farmer waits too long, hoping for the rain to return, the saplings over-mature in the nursery and the final crop yield drops significantly. It is a lose-lose situation. And it isn't just paddy. We are seeing severely delayed acreage for soybean, cotton, and crucial pulse crops across the country.
So what exactly can the government do in an emergency review meeting? You can't legislate the clouds to open up.
You can't control the weather, but you can implement structural triage. The government has activated a multi-pronged response. First, they are issuing urgent crop diversification advisories. Through the Krishi Vigyan Kendras, the local agricultural extension centers, they are actively pushing farmers in the highest deficit areas to abandon paddy this season and switch to drought-resistant, short-duration crops like millets and specific pulses.
Make the switch quickly.
Right. Second, they are pre-positioning battalions of the National Disaster Response Force, the NDRF, in states vulnerable to subsequent drought or sudden floods. And third, they are directing insurance companies to release advance claims under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, the PMFBY, which is the National Crop Insurance Scheme.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this strategy because it sounds like a logistical nightmare. Let's look at the forecast. The IMD is predicting that while we have this El Niño-induced drought right now in June, a La Niña weather pattern is likely to develop by August, and La Niña usually brings intense above-normal rainfall. So imagine you are a farmer. The rains fail in June. The government tells you to switch to a short-duration pulse crop that doesn't need much water. You spend the money, you plant the pulses. Then August arrives, La Niña hits, and a massive flood washes away your entire field. How does a farmer physically and financially survive that kind of whiplash?
The brutal truth is, without state intervention, they don't. That extreme volatility drought followed immediately by flood is the exact reality of modern agricultural risk management in the climate change era. And that is exactly why those revised guidelines for the PMFBY crop insurance scheme are so structurally vital.
Ah, the insurance scheme.
Right. In the past, crop insurance only paid out if your final harvest at the end of the season was low. But in the scenario you just described, the farmer needs help in the middle of the season. The PMFBY has been updated to cover prevented sowing if the drought stops you from planting at all, and mid-season adversity if a flood destroys the crop halfway through. The financial safety net has to be as dynamic and volatile as the climate itself, or the entire rural economy collapses.
It is a brutal tightrope they're walking every single season now. Let's close out our PIB foundation by briefly looking at the future generation that is going to inherit all of these complex systems we've been discussing. Topic 7. The Pradhan and Mantri Rashtriya Puraskar. This falls under GS2, governance.
This is an important piece of civil recognition. The PMRBP is India's absolute highest civilian honor, specifically for children, legally defined as citizens between the ages of 5 and 18. It is administered by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, and it is traditionally presented by the Prime Minister on National Girl Child Day, which falls on January 24th every year.
The sources list 7 specific categories for the award, reflecting a really broad spectrum of achievement. Innovation, social service, scholastic excellence, arts and culture, sports, bravery, and environmental action. And the state provides substantial perks alongside the honor the awardee receives: a formal medal, a cash prize of 1 lakh rupees, and a Pushpa travel card, which grants the child and 1 companion complimentary train travel across the Indian Railways network.
From a historical and administrative perspective, it is also worth noting for our listeners that this award structure was formerly known as the Rajiv Gandhi Manav Seva Award. It was comprehensively restructured and renamed the PMRBP in 2019 by the current administration to broaden its scope and elevate its national prominence.
It's a vital mechanism for encouraging exceptional civic behavior from a young age. Now take a breath. That wraps up our 7 foundational PIB highlights. We've set the stage. Now it is time to plunge into the deep end.
Ready when you are.
We're moving into part 2, our detailed analytical breakdowns of General Studies Papers 2 and 3. And we're starting with a topic that is highly complex, deeply debated, and structurally changes how civil society operates in India. We were looking at the new amendments, tightening the norms for foreign donations. This is GS2, Governance and Polity.
And before we unpack the legal mechanics here, we need to set a strict parameter for our analysis. The regulation of foreign funding is an intensely polarizing issue. Our role here is to impartially deconstruct the legal architecture of these new rules, explain the compelling arguments presented by the state, and equally examine the criticisms raised by civil society, entirely based on the provided source material.
Absolutely. No taking sides, just exposing the wiring of the policy. So the facts are these. On June 23rd, the central government enacted a new set of amendments to the Foreign Contribution Regulation rules of 2011. And to be clear, these new rules are incredibly tight. Let's look at the 3 major changes. First, the reporting threshold has been effectively eliminated.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning every single NGO registered under the FCRA must now file a detailed annual return using Form FC4, and it must be officially certified by a chartered accountant, regardless of whether they received $1 million or $0 that year. In the past, you only needed that expensive CA certification if your foreign receipts crossed a certain financial threshold. The second major change is a strict, explicit ban on subgranting or transferring any foreign funds to entities that have been debarred from government procurement processes, or any entity listed on the UN sanctions list. And the third major shift is the acceleration of the reporting timeline. Previously, if an NGO received a foreign contribution exceeding 1 crore rupees in a single quarter, they had 30 days to report it to the Ministry of Home Affairs.
30 days?
Right. That window has now been slashed to just 7 days. Furthermore, the requirement to submit utilization certificates proving exactly how the money was spent has been increased from half-yearly to quarterly.
If we look at the operational reality for an NGO, it is basically like moving from an annual health checkup to being forced to wear a 247 heart monitor that alerts the government every time your pulse changes. The administrative and financial burden of compliance just skyrocketed.
It really did.
To understand why the government is applying this level of pressure, we have to look at the historical trajectory of the FCRA. The original act was passed in 2010, but the massive foundational paradigm shift occurred with the 2020 amendments to the act itself. Those 2020 changes fundamentally altered the landscape. They mandated that every single rupee of foreign funding entering India, regardless of which NGO it was destined for, had to land in one specific designated branch of the State Bank of India in New Delhi.
Just one branch.
Exactly. Imagine running a small tribal welfare NGO in rural Odisha and having to navigate the bureaucracy of a specific Delhi bank branch just to receive your funding.
And the 2020 amendments also slashed the cap on administrative expenses from 50% down to 20%. So if you get a grant, you can only use 20% of it to pay your staff salaries, rent, and electricity. The rest has to go directly to the project. Plus, they entirely prohibited subgranting, meaning a large, well-resourced international NGO could no longer receive funds and distribute them to smaller, grassroots NGOs across the country.
Exactly. The 2020 changes were the sledgehammer. These new 2026 rules are the tightening of the vice. And what is legally fascinating about these new rules is that they are classified as subordinate legislation. The executive branch, the relevant ministry, drafted and implemented these operational changes without needing to introduce a new amendment bill and debate it on the floor of Parliament. They used the rulemaking power delegated to them by the original act.
So let's look at the friction this is causing. The civil society response, as documented in the sources, has been highly critical. Organizations like the Internet Freedom Foundation and Oxfam argue that these new rules are vastly disproportionate to the stated goal of transparency. They point to the raw data. Following the 2020 amendments and subsequent compliance crackdowns, the number of active FCRA-registered NGOs in India has plummeted from around 22,000 down to roughly 15,500 today.
That's a massive drop.
Yeah, thousands of licenses have been canceled or allowed to lapse due to the sheer difficulty of compliance.
And the sources note that this domestic contraction is being tracked internationally. Institutions like the VDEM Institute have specifically cited this shrinking of the operational space for civil society organizations as a key metric in their decision to downgrade India's rating from an electoral democracy to an electoral autocracy. That is the core argument against the tightening, that it is a bureaucratic strangulation of dissenting voices or independent social work.
But we have to look at the other side of the coin. What is the state's legal and constitutional justification for this level of surveillance on foreign money?
The state's argument is rooted in sovereignty, and it has been validated by the highest court in the land. When civil society groups challenged the massive 2020 amendments, the Supreme Court of India delivered a landmark ruling in the 2022 case, Noel Harper versus Union of India. The court emphatically upheld the amendments. They clarified a crucial constitutional point. The fundamental right to form an association, guaranteed under Article 19(1)(c), does not guarantee an unfettered fundamental right to receive foreign funding to run that association.
The court used the phrase compelling state interest, didn't they?
Yes, that is the crux of the legal doctrine. The Supreme Court ruled that the state has a compelling interest in regulating foreign contributions to protect the sovereignty, integrity, and democratic processes of India from unchecked foreign interference. The government's view is straightforward. Foreign money is rarely entirely neutral. It can be utilized to covertly influence domestic policy debates, stall vital infrastructure projects through funded litigation, or worse, finance anti-national or extremist activities.
All right.
Therefore, extreme oversight and rigorous auditing are not restrictions on democracy. They are necessary constitutional shields to protect the republic.
So you have this profound, unresolvable tension at the heart of Indian democracy today. On one hand, the absolute imperative of preventing foreign powers from buying influence in domestic affairs. On the other, the reality that the administrative cure might be asphyxiating the very domestic civil society that helps the most vulnerable citizens. It is a razor-thin line.
It is arguably the most defining legal and political debate over the role of non-state actors in India's governance structure today.
Okay, from regulating the invisible flow of foreign funds, we are going to pivot to a very physical flow that has been violently choked off. Let's look at the Persian Gulf maritime crisis. This is GS2, international relations.
Right, and the context here is a severe, escalating humanitarian and economic crisis. Ever since the hostilities of the U.S.-Iran war began on February 28th, the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most vital maritime choke points on the planet, has essentially been closed to commercial shipping. As a direct result, we are currently looking at roughly 280 merchant vessels completely stranded in or near the strait.
Just stranded, parked in a war zone for months. When we talk about global trade, it's easy to focus on the containers and the cargo, but the human toll of this blockade is horrifying. The sources estimate there are between 5,000 and 7,000 seafarers trapped on those ships.
Yeah, that's just a tragic number.
And crucially for us, between 1,200 and 1,500 of those trapped sailors are Indian nationals. They've been stuck since February. They are running out of heavy fuel oil to keep the generators running, they are running low on potable water, and their food rations are depleting. I cannot even begin to imagine the mental health crisis unfolding on those steel decks right now.
It is a dire situation, which is exactly why the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, the UN agency responsible for the safety of shipping, convened an emergency session of its Maritime Safety Committee. They had to bypass the geopolitical deadlock and focus on the immediate humanitarian extraction. The solution they have brokered is an incredibly complex, three-phase multinational convoy operation designed to evacuate these stranded ships over a 7-day period.
Now, when I read the word convoy in the source material, my mind instantly flashed back to World War II history books. It sounds exactly like the Atlantic convoy tactics, where dozens of slow, vulnerable merchant ships would huddle tightly together in a massive grid while heavily armed naval warships circled the perimeter to hunt down U-boats. Are we literally using 1940s naval tactics in 2026?
The underlying tactical logic hasn't changed because the fundamental vulnerability of a massive, slow-moving cargo ship hasn't changed. They are sitting ducks. The plan relies entirely on the Hormuz Security Initiative Coalition. We were talking about deploying advanced guided missile destroyers and frigates from the UK, France, Italy, and Spain to throw a protective anti-aircraft and anti-missile umbrella over these merchant vessels as they navigate the treacherous, narrow waters of the strait. And importantly, the IMO document lists India as an observer to this initiative.
Wait, observer. If there are 1,500 Indian citizens starving on those ships, does India just watch, or do we actually send Indian Navy warships into this multinational convoy?
This brings up a fascinating intersection of international maritime law and sovereign strategic calculus. Under UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, specifically Article 98, every single flag state has a binding legal duty to render assistance to any person in distress at sea.
Okay, so there's a duty.
Exactly. Given that hundreds of Indian citizens are facing an existential threat, India has a crystal clear legal, moral, and consular obligation to act. However, translating that legal duty into a kinetic military deployment, ordering Indian Navy destroyers into a highly contested active conflict zone alongside Western navies, is a massive escalation. It is the ultimate test of India's stated ambition to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. Do we protect our own, or do we rely on the French and the British to escort Indian citizens to safety?
It is a massive strategic dilemma. It makes complete logical sense for a sovereign government to deploy its hard power to clear a physical geographic blockade that is trapping its citizens. But what happens to that logic when the government is the one unilaterally blocking a digital pathway? Let's unpack the legal anatomy of the telegram ban. This straddles GS2 and GS3, touching on fundamental rights and cybersecurity.
This is one of the most consequential legal debates currently unfolding regarding digital rights in India. The facts are that the central government officially blocked access to the encrypted messaging application Telegram. The legal mechanism they utilize to execute this block is Section 69A of the Information Technology Act. But digital rights advocates and constitutional legal analysts are forcefully arguing that the government has severely stretched the statutory meaning of the word information to justify this ban.
Let's break down that mechanism, because the wording of the law is everything here. Section 69A gives the government the executive power to block public access to specific information, like a specific inflammatory post, a terrorist recruitment video, or a fake news tweet if it threatens public order, national security, or sovereignty. But in this case, they didn't ask ISPs to block a specific post. They ordered the blocking of the entire Telegram platform for millions of users.
Exactly. The core legal distinction the courts will have to examine is the difference between specific information and the entire computer resource or intermediary platform itself. To understand this, we need to look at precedent. Let's rewind to 2020, when the Indian government executed a massive digital strike banning TikTok, WeChat, and 58 other Chinese origin applications.
Right, I remember that.
When they did that, they utilized Section 69 of the IT Act. Section 69 is a much broader, more aggressive power designed specifically to block or intercept entire computer resources and networks. But for Telegram, they chose to use Section 69A, which was legislatively designed to be narrow and targeted.
So, to use an analogy, Section 69A is supposed to be a surgical scalpel. It is meant to cut out a specific tumor, a bad post, while leaving the patient alive. Section 69 is a sledgehammer meant to demolish the whole building. The legal argument being made by activists is that the government just used a scalpel to justify demolishing a building.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the argument. And it brings us back to the most important internet rights case in Indian legal history, the 2015 Supreme Court judgment in Shreya Singhal versus Union of India. In that judgment, the Supreme Court did uphold the constitutional validity of Section 69A, But, and this is a massive, but they only upheld it because the section contains strict procedural safeguards.
What kind of safeguards?
It was explicitly designed for surgical strikes on specific content, requiring a defined review process. The court never envisioned it being used to carpet bomb an entire communication infrastructure.
And beyond the specific wording of the IT Act, the sources heavily reference the Puraskar judgment from 2017.
Oh.
How does the right to privacy connect to an app ban?
The Puraskar judgment established the fundamental right to privacy, but crucially, it laid down the proportionality test for any state action that infringes on fundamental rights, including the right to free speech under Article 19(1). The test has 4 prongs. The action must have a legitimate aim, it must be suitable to achieve that aim, it must be necessary, meaning there is no less restrictive alternative, and it must balance the restriction against the right.
Okay, let's apply that test. The context provided in the sources is that Telegram was reportedly blocked specifically to prevent the mass leaking of question papers and coordinated cheating during a highly sensitive 4-day national examination.
Right. So the aim preventing exam fraud and maintaining the integrity of the education system is absolutely legitimate. But does it pass the necessity and balancing prongs? If you block the entire communication platform for millions of innocent users, disrupting businesses, journalists, and everyday conversations just to secure a 4-day exam, is that proportionate?
It feels like burning down the entire city library just because you couldn't locate the one book that had dangerous instructions in it.
Many constitutional experts argue it completely fails the proportionality test. The state's counter-argument is often technical. Because Telegram utilizes highly encrypted cloud-based architecture, the government cannot technically identify and isolate the specific information or the specific group sharing the leaked papers. Therefore, targeting the entire intermediary becomes the only technologically viable option to stop the immediate harm.
It's a tough spot.
It is. This entire debate whether technical limitations justify disproportionate executive action is inevitably headed to the constitutional courts. It will likely be the next major defining precedent for internet freedom in India.
It is a fascinating collision of law and technology. But while a 4-day digital disruption for an exam is a severe headache for citizens, the 4-month physical disruption in the Persian Gulf that we talked about earlier, that has caused deep structural bleeding trauma to the entire Indian macroeconomic system. Let's shift to topic 11, how the West Asia crisis revealed India's economic pain points. This is GS3, economy and energy security.
We hear it constantly in the news. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. And while the GDP numbers support that, the reality is that the 4-month window of the U.S.-Iran war leading up to the Muscat Accord brutally, undeniably exposed our ultimate Achilles heel.
Energy imports.
Yes. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, global energy markets panicked. The price of Brent crude oil spiked violently, shooting from roughly $78 a barrel to well over $115 a barrel.
And the cascading domino effect of that single metric is absolutely terrifying for India. We are structurally addicted to foreign oil. India imports a staggering 85% of its crude oil requirements, and over 40% of those total imports physically transit through the Strait of Hormuz. The source material highlights a brutal piece of economic math. For every single $10 increase in the price of a barrel of oil, it costs the Indian economy an additional $12 to $14 billion annually.
And when you suddenly have to find billions of extra dollars just to buy the exact same amount of oil to keep the lights on, it crushes your currency. Because we have to buy that oil in dollars, the demand for dollars skyrockets and the value of the rupee collapses. During this crisis window, the rupee fell from 83 down to 97 against the U.S. dollar.
Wow, that's a huge drop.
That is a 17% depreciation in a matter of months. To stop it from free-falling even further into a catastrophic currency crisis, the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, had to intervene aggressively. They had to burn through over $30 billion of our painstakingly accumulated foreign exchange reserves, literally selling dollars into the open market just to artificially stabilize the rupee.
But it wasn't just the price of fuel at the petrol pump that hit the average citizen. It hit their grocery bills. Because the Strait of Hormuz isn't just an oil pipeline, it is a fertilizer pipeline.
Precisely. India imports roughly 60% of its diammonium phosphate, or DAP, fertilizer. Furthermore, we import massive quantities of liquefied natural gas, LNG, predominantly from Gulf nations like Qatar. That LNG isn't just used for power. It is the vital chemical feedstock used by domestic Indian factories to synthesize urea fertilizer. No transit through Hormuz means no imported fertilizer, and no imported LNG means no domestic fertilizer production.
And this happened right as the Kharif sowing season was supposed to kick off.
Exactly. You combine a severe shortage of fertilizer with the delayed monsoons we discussed earlier, and you guarantee lower crop yields. When you combine the fear of lower crop yields with the massive imported inflation of transporting goods on $115 a barrel diesel, the result is explosive food inflation.
Right.
The sources note that food inflation hit 9.2%, a five-year high. The geopolitical crisis essentially reached directly into the wallet of every single Indian household.
But here's the specific part of the source material that genuinely, truly shocked me. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR. For those who might not know, the SPR consists of these massive, highly secure underground rock caverns where a nation intentionally hoards millions of barrels of crude oil, specifically for emergencies like a war or a blockade. The International Energy Agency, the IEA, explicitly recommends that all major economies hold at least 90 days' worth of net oil imports in reserve to survive a prolonged supply shock.
That's the baseline.
Yeah. How many days of emergency oil does India actually have in its SPR?
According to the data, India's current SPR capacity equates to just 9.5 days of national consumption.
9.5 days. That is functionally nothing. If a full-scale regional war breaks out and all shipping stops entirely, our entire national economy, our transport grid, our military logistics halts in less than 10 days.
It is a critically inadequate buffer. We currently have 3 operational SPR sites located in Visakhapatnam, Mangalore, and Padur, holding a combined total of roughly 5.33 million metric tons. Because that buffer is so small, the crisis revealed that India's macroeconomic responses were entirely ad hoc.
Just scrambling.
Exactly. The government was scrambling to mandate emergency fuel blending. The RBI was desperately selling reserves. We were treating the symptoms because we lack the systemic structural buffer to absorb the shock.
So what are the actual structural solutions? We can't just cross our fingers, stare at the map of the Middle East, and hope the Gulf stays peaceful forever.
The structural solutions require executing massive long-term capital projects to fundamentally decouple our economic survival from a 33-kilometer-wide choke point. It means rapidly accelerating the national green hydrogen mission to entirely replace imported LNG as the feedstock for our fertilizer production. It means executing the highly delayed coal gasification mission so we can utilize our domestic coal reserves to make urea.
Moving to electric, too.
Yes, aggressively pushing the PM e-drive EV transition to structurally destroy our domestic demand for imported crude oil. And on the geopolitical front, it necessitates building alternative overland trade routes like the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, the IM, that completely bypassed the Strait of Hormuz. We have to shift from a posture of ad hoc crisis survival to actual engineered structural resilience.
It is a monumental task of state building. Okay, we're going to shift gears entirely now. We are moving from the macro structures of the global economy to the micro-legal structure of one of India's most prominent, influential, and debated organizations. Let's examine topic 12.
Is the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, a legal person? The Kharge-Bhagwat controversy. This is a pure GS2 polity deep dive.
And once again, strict instructions to ourselves here. We are analyzing the pure constitutional jurisprudence and taxation law surrounding this issue, completely impartially, precisely as it is laid out in the legal analysis provided in our sources. Agreed. Let's look at the trigger for the debate. Karnataka's Home Minister, Priyank Kharge, publicly demanded that the RSS provide its formal registration details, its official funding sources, and a legally binding list of its office bearers. In response, the RSS chief, Mohan Bhagwat, essentially dismissed the demand as a political gimmick, stating they have no such obligation.
Right.
This prompted a deep legal analysis piece in the Hindu, asking a fundamental question. Under Indian law, does the RSS actually have to register? Is it legally recognized as a person?
To unpack this, we first have to clearly define what a legal person actually is in the realm of jurisprudence. A legal person is any entity that the law recognizes as being capable of having rights and bearing duties. A legal person can sign a contract, it can own a piece of property in its own name, it can sue someone in court, and crucially, it can be sued.
Right, like a corporation.
Exactly. Now, natural persons, you, me, any human being, we possess this status automatically by birth. But an artificial legal person, like a registered corporation, a registered cooperative society, or a formal legal trust, only acquires this legal personality through the deliberate statutory act of registration with the state.
So by that logic, if an organization is entirely unregistered, it simply isn't a legal person in the eyes of the court.
Correct. An unregistered voluntary association is, legally speaking, a non-entity. It cannot open a bank account in the name of the association. It cannot buy a headquarters building in the name of the association. Legally, that property must be held jointly by the individual human office bearers. And if you want to take legal action against it, you cannot sue the association itself. You must identify and sue the specific individuals connected to it.
But the core of the political demand was that they must register. Does Indian law actually force a massive organization to become an artificial legal person? Does the RSS have a legal duty to register?
This is where we look at the bedrock of the Constitution, specifically Article 19C. This article guarantees all citizens the fundamental right to form associations or unions. Senior constitutional advocates emphasize that this is a fundamental right, not a statutory duty.
Okay, that's a big distinction.
Huge. There is absolutely no law on the books in India, not the Societies Registration Act, not the Companies Act, not the Indian Trusts Act that mandates a voluntary cultural, social, or political organization to formally register itself. Registration is entirely an optional mechanism. It is a choice the group makes if they want access to the benefits of corporate personality, like limited liability or owning property in a corporate name.
And the RSS hasn't made a choice.
No, the RSS, throughout its history, has simply chosen not to exercise that option. They have chosen to remain an unregistered voluntary association.
Okay, I understand the constitutional right to remain unregistered. But wait, let me push back on the financial aspect, because Kharge specifically asked about funding. The RSS collects funds, most notably the Guru Dakshina, where members donate money. If they are an unregistered non-entity, how on earth do they handle millions of rupees? How does the income tax department just let that slide? Surely you can't just call yourself a voluntary pool and completely avoid paying taxes on massive revenue.
You would intuitively think so, but it relies on a very established, fascinating legal mechanism in tax law known as the mutuality principle. The Guru Dakshina is classified as a voluntary contribution pooled together by the Swayamsevaks, the members themselves. The legal principle of mutuality dictates that if a distinct group of people pool their own money together for a common, non-commercial, mutual purpose, and then expend that money exclusively among themselves for that purpose, that pooled money cannot be classified as taxable income.
Really? Because they're just giving money to themselves?
Yeah. That's the core logic. It's simple. A person cannot make a profit off of themselves. Therefore, a mutual association cannot make a taxable profit off its own members.
Has that actually held up in court?
It has. The Central Board of Direct Taxes, the CBDT, examined this exact issue and ruled that the RSS's internal funds legitimately fall under the mutuality principle. Furthermore, the Patna High Court explicitly upheld this interpretation in a significant ruling back in 1994, granting them exemption from income tax on those specific mutual contributions.
And the sources also note a detail regarding foreign funding, which ties back to our earlier discussion on the FCRA.
Yes. The RSS maintains that it absolutely does not receive any financial contributions from foreign sources. Therefore, the entire rigorous compliance architecture of the FCRA, which we just analyzed,
And to put a final legal cap on the discussion, the sources mentioned a very recent observation from the Madhya Pradesh High Court in July 2024. The court observed that a voluntary organization does not become unlawful merely because it is large, influential, or politically controversial. So, separating the intense political rhetoric from the dry jurisprudence, the legal framework is unambiguously clear. Voluntary non-registration is a constitutional protected choice.
Precisely. The RSS operates without a corporate legal personality by deliberate design and constitutional right.
All right. From an entity that fiercely guards its unregistered status, we move to a massive corporate entity that is currently trying to spend $1 billion to buy its way into a new financial personality. Let's unpack topic 13. Meta's massive $900 million investment in CRA, alongside the appointment of Kunal Shah as the CEO of WhatsApp India. This is GS3, sitting right at the bleeding edge of technology, economy, and regulatory policy.
This development represents a seismic structural shift in India's digital payments and fintech ecosystem. Meta, the massive global parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, is injecting nearly $1 billion directly into CRA. And simultaneously, they are bringing in CRED's founder and CEO, Kunal Shah, to take the helm and run WhatsApp's entire operation in India.
Now, if you are listening to this and you use CRED to pay your monthly credit card bills and use WhatsApp to text your family and your boss, Meta is currently betting almost $1 billion that they can successfully merge those two distinct behaviors. But to understand why Meta is doing this, you have to look at the glaring mismatch in the user data. WhatsApp is an absolute behemoth. They have over 500 million active users in India.
500 million.
Yeah, it is by far their single largest market on the planet. But their integrated payment feature, WhatsApp Pay, is a complete, undeniable dud. Despite having 500 million people opening the app daily, WhatsApp Pay only commands about a dismal 7% of the UPI market share. They're getting absolutely crushed by PhonePe, which holds roughly 46%, and Google Pay, which sits around 37%.
And then you contrast that massive failure with CRED's profile. CRED only has about 17 million active users. Compared to WhatsApp's 500 million, 17 million is a tiny drop in the bucket.
Right.
And this is the entire strategic logic behind the billion-dollar check. Those 17 million users are the absolute most creditworthy, high-value, premium spenders in the entire Indian economy. They are the verified credit card holders who regularly spend 3, 4, or 5 times more per single transaction than your average everyday UPI user. More importantly, CRED possesses their granular spending patterns, their behavioral data regarding debt repayment, and their intense brand loyalty.
So to use an analogy, here's where it gets really interesting. Meta is basically looking at the Indian market and realizing they own the biggest, most crowded public square in the country, WhatsApp. But nobody is spending money there. CRED, on the other hand, owns the ultra-exclusive, incredibly wealthy VIP section, but it's small. Meta is essentially buying the VIP section and hiring its manager, Kunal Shah, to figure out how to monetize the massive crowd in the public square using the VIP playbook.
That is precisely the strategy. They want to transform WhatsApp from a simple messaging utility into a comprehensive financial super app. But this aggressive expansion strategy is going to immediately slam into massive structural regulatory hurdles. First and foremost, the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, is deeply historically paranoid about the unchecked rise of big tech monopolies in the financial sector.
Understandably so.
Right. If you successfully combine the ubiquitous messaging infrastructure of WhatsApp with the sophisticated financial engine and lending capabilities of CRED, you instantly create an institution that is essentially too big to fail.
And it's not just a vague paranoia. There are actual hard-coded rules designed to prevent exactly this kind of dominance now, right?
Yes. The National Payments Corporation of India, the NPCI, the body that governs the UPI network, has implemented a strict regulatory rule capping any single third-party application provider at a maximum of 30% of the total UPI transaction volume. They designed the specific ceiling to prevent a PhonePe or a Google Pay monopoly. If the combined WhatsApp CRE ecosystem successfully scales up the way Meta envisions, they will rocket toward that 30% ceiling incredibly fast.
And then what?
That trajectory will undoubtedly trigger intense, prolonged regulatory scrutiny from the Competition Commission of India, the CCI, regarding anti-competitive practices.
Plus, we have to talk about the data privacy nightmare this creates. Think about the data profile they have on you. WhatsApp knows exactly who you talk to, how often, where you are geographically located, and what media you consume. CRED knows exactly what you purchase, what restaurants you eat at, what flights you take, and precisely how much high-interest debt you carry.
It's everything.
Yeah. If Meta's AI algorithms start actively training on that combined hyper-intimate data set to target you with loans or financial products, it is going to raise massive red flags under the newly enacted Digital Personal Data Protection Act, the DPDP Act.
It truly is the ultimate stress test for India's modern regulatory architecture. The regulators have to figure out how to balance the desire for cutting-edge fintech innovation and massive foreign direct investment against the very real systemic threat of a deeply entrenched data and payments monopoly controlling the financial lives of 500 million citizens.
We will definitely be watching the CCI's response to that merger closely.
Okay, we are going to end our analytical deep dive with a look at a neighboring country that is trying to leverage its own unique strategic assets for a very different kind of deal. Topic 14. Pakistan's unexpected peacekeeping role in the Iran war. This is GS2, International Relations. Once again, we approach this highly sensitive topic impartially, looking strictly at the diplomatic mechanics and the geopolitical outcomes as they are outlined in our sources. The central event here is the June 14th Muscat Accord, the diplomatic agreement that successfully de-escalated and paused the U.S.-Iran hostilities. And surprisingly to many observers, Pakistan, operating primarily via Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif alongside the Sultanate of Oman, served as the primary indispensable mediator for this accord.
When you look at the outcomes, the diplomatic dividends for Pakistan have been absolutely massive, both at home and abroad. Domestically, Pakistan is currently suffering through a brutal, crippling economic crisis. They're dealing with historic inflation, massive debt, and the harsh conditionalities of an IMF bailout program.
Right.
But because Prime Minister Sharif successfully managed this high-stakes global mediation, his domestic political approval ratings have surged to an unprecedented 65%. The sheer prestige of the diplomatic win is essentially acting as a smokescreen, masking the severe domestic economic pain from the electorate.
And internationally, the dividend is even greater. It is a complete rehabilitation of their global image. For years, Pakistan has been internationally isolated, constantly fighting off the stigma of the FATF gray listing over systemic terrorism financing. By successfully brokering a fragile peace between Washington and Tehran, Pakistan has aggressively repositioned itself as an indispensable, responsible geopolitical player on the world stage.
And you have to admit, they actually have the unique leverage required to pull it off. They share a massive, porous land border and deep sectarian ties with Iran, giving them access to Tehran. Simultaneously, they possess decades of historic, deeply entrenched military and intelligence ties with the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, giving them credibility in Washington. They were the perfect middleman.
If we look at the historical pattern, this is a classic, highly effective Pakistani geopolitical maneuver. Pakistan is expertly utilizing its raw geography as strategic currency. They did the exact same thing in the 1980s during the Soviet-Afghan War, positioning themselves as the vital conduit for U.S. arms. They did it again 2 decades later during the U.S. War on Terror. Whenever global superpowers desperately need secure access, intelligence, or deniable back channels in that specific volatile region, Pakistan leverages its deep state intelligence network to make itself absolutely vital to the solution. And by making themselves vital, they extract massive economic aid packages and broad diplomatic cover from the West.
But the sources also highlight a very deep, unresolvable paradox here, especially when viewed from New Delhi's perspective. The sources refer to it as the paradox of the Frankenstein state.
Yes. India is pointing out the profound, glaring contradiction to the international community. The exact same military intelligence apparatus, the ISI, that just successfully mediated global peace in Muscat, is the very same apparatus that India possesses mountains of evidence accusing of continually funding, training, and supporting cross-border terror groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed.
So essentially, the international community in Geneva and Washington is giving Pakistan a standing ovation for successfully putting out a massive geopolitical fire in the Middle East, while India is standing right next door, pointing out that Pakistan is still actively lighting terrorist fires in Kashmir.
Exactly. And this paradox is precisely why India absolutely refuses to engage in any resumption of bilateral dialogue with Pakistan, despite Pakistan's shiny new diplomatic halo from the Muscat Accord. India's official stance remains rigid and absolute. Terror and talks cannot proceed simultaneously.
That makes sense.
The fact that Pakistan acted as a competent peace broker in the Persian Gulf does not alter the bloody, bilateral reality on the line of control for India. It is a dual reality that the state embodies. They are a threat enabler in their immediate neighborhood and a peace broker globally, existing simultaneously.
That is a highly complex, slightly grim note to end our analysis on, but it perfectly illustrates those murky, muddy geopolitical waters we talked about at the very beginning of the hour. That comprehensively wraps up our 14 detailed topics.
Oh.
We have covered the ground.
We covered a lot.
We did. Now, let's crystallize the most vital, high-yield facts you absolutely need to take away for your exams. It is time for Part 3. The rapid-fire recap focusing intensely on prelims and mapping data points. I'm going to throw the broad topics at you, and I need you to rapid-fire the most testable, objective data points exclusively for the benefit of our listeners taking notes. Let's start with the critical minerals mission. Go.
56 blocks were successfully auctioned out of 88. We are currently operating in the 7th tranche of auctions. Crucially, the first ever central auctions for these minerals just happened in Gujarat, Uttarakhand, and Telangana.
What's the main stat?
The most vital statistic to remember. India remains dangerously import-dependent, importing between 85 to 100% of its critical mineral needs, specifically lithium and rare earth elements.
Excellent. The RSS legal status debate.
Constitutionally protected under Article 19(1)(c). which guarantees the fundamental right to form associations, but critically, it does not impose any statutory duty to register that association. Financially, their operations rely on the mutuality principle of tax law, meaning that internally pooled voluntary contributions, such as the Guru Dakshina, are non-taxable because a mutual group cannot profit off itself.
The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR. Give me the locations and the brutal math.
We have 3 operational underground sites, Visakhapatnam on the east coast and Mangalore and Padur on the west coast. Their combined maximum capacity is 5.33 million metric tons. That equates to just 9.5 days of national consumption coverage. This is vastly, dangerously below the International Energy Agency's formally recommended standard of maintaining 90 days of net imports.
The VOC port's green milestone.
Located in Thoothukudi, Tamil Nadu, it has officially become India's very first major port to achieve the ISO 14001 certification for environmental management, driven largely by its new shore power supply infrastructure. Historically, it is named after the legendary freedom fighter V.O. Chidambaranar, famously known as the helmsman of Tamil.
The Pradhan Mantri Rashtriya Bal Puraskar.
Formerly administered by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, it is presented annually by the Prime Minister on January 24th, which coincides with National Girl Child Day. It recognizes exceptional achievements across 7 distinct categories for citizens between the ages of 5 and 18.
Perfect. Now let's lock in the spatial awareness with our mapping focus. Where exactly is the VOC port located geographically?
It is situated on the Gulf of Mannar in the southeastern coastal region of Tamil Nadu.
The Strait of Hormuz. Give me the dimensions.
It is a vital, incredibly vulnerable maritime choke point connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the wider Arabian Sea. At its absolute narrowest point, the navigable channel is only 33 to 55 kilometers wide.
Bergenstock, Switzerland.
Highlighted in the geopolitical sources as the current designated site for the Phase 2 U.S.-Iran nuclear de-escalation talks following the Muscat Accord.
Podur, Karnataka.
Geographically significant as the location of India's absolute largest single strategic petroleum reserve cavern facility, capable of holding 2.5 million metric tons of crude.
Arunachal Pradesh.
Recently included in the newly expanded exploration license tranche for critical minerals. Geographically and geopolitically highly strategic due to its immediate proximity to the contested line of actual control with China.
Muscat, Oman.
The neutral diplomatic host city where the pivotal U.S.-Iran peace accord was finalized. Crucially, from a mapping perspective, Oman sits geographically just outside the Strait of Hormuz choke point, granting it unblocked, secure access to the open ocean, enhancing its status as a stable mediator.
And finally, Kathmandu, Nepal.
Highlighted recently in the diplomatic sources in the specific context of India firmly officially rejecting any proposed third-party Chinese mediation regarding ongoing India-Nepal bilateral border demarcations.
Phenomenal. That efficiently locks in the geography and the hard data you need.
Before we officially wrap up the hour, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought that attempts to tie the geopolitical mechanics we've discussed back to our domestic reality.
Okay, let's hear it.
Today, we looked at India striving desperately for Atmanirbhar Bharat, or true self-reliance, in critical minerals, digging up new blocks in Gujarat and Arunachal Pradesh to break our dependence on China. But simultaneously, in the exact same week, we saw India suffering from a terrifying structural lack of strategic petroleum reserves when a tiny 33-kilometer strait closed in the Middle East, crippling our currency and devastating our agricultural fertilizer supply.
It's a stark contrast.
It is. It raises a profoundly important question for you to mull over as you study these interconnected systems. In a deeply technologically hyper-connected global economy, is true absolute self-reliance ever actually achievable for any modern nation? Or, through all our policies and mining missions, are we just constantly, endlessly shifting the map of exactly who we are forced to depend on?
That is the exact kind of systemic muddy water paradox we love to navigate on this show. Thank you so much for joining us on this comprehensive daily deep dive, the 3D Initiative. Your sheer dedication to staying insanely curious, to looking past the headlines and understanding the actual mechanics of the world is what makes doing this worthwhile. Remember, the absolute best way to not feel overwhelmed by the sheer crushing volume of global information is to ignore the noise, focus on the mechanisms, and just take it one deep dive at a time. We will be right back here with you tomorrow.